I'm very glad that I'm not into this alone. I will be helped by some esteemed panelists. And good thing about them is that they are coming in from diverse disciplines. So Mehreen, as you obviously know, she is heading the retail and consumer portfolio, both obviously, in a retail-oriented organization, mostly retail-oriented organization, which is Bank Alfalah. Then we've got Nassir, who is the operations head in a Pakistani bank which has global operations. So he is going to provide his perspective of what he thinks the operational transformation within a digital journey should happen, and how would they fit into the entire equation. And then we've got Mr. Tahir Rizavi, and Tahir is heading or is managing the innovation and analytics piece within Faysal Bank, which is obviously a forward-looking bank. They are thinking of doing something innovative and something value-generating in the next few years or so. And then we've got a completely different set of organization, or like an organization, FINCA Microfinance Bank. So Tughral is going to help us out seeking some insights as to how innovation impacts the microfinance institutions and what kind of learning we can have from this innovation and microfinance industry. I would, in the interest of time, obviously, I would start my questions. And my first question would be, Mehreen, to you. And I think probably you mentioned that to me during the lunch break, that I can go on and on because you have given me a very loaded question. But I would request you to be as precise but as elaborative as possible in your response. So Mehreen, when I see customer experience, seamless omni-channel customer experience, I find that as an integral part of the overall digital promise that we make to our customers. But I think the most important part of it is actually how do we sort of continuously profile and reprofile our customers? How do we sort of link ourselves with their overall everyday lives? And most importantly, how do we predict as to what they want before they knock our door or someone else's door? So keeping that in context, I would like to ask you a question is, how do you feel we should do this intensive pulse check? And how do you keep on doing it? And what are the challenges and what are the strategies that you may wish to share with the audience with respect to being followed by institutions? And last point is that obviously you've got an enterprise-wide loyalty program, which essentially is a good program. So how do you plan to sort of leverage that and further improvise it for further for improving digital stickiness?
Thanks, Faraz. There has to be a plan, first of all. What you've talked about, I think all those things don't happen by chance. They don't happen by coincidence. And from my experience and what we've done over the last 5-6 years at Bank Alfalah, the engagement obviously is part of a process, part of a journey. I think much before that, as Robin mentioned in one of the earlier sessions this morning, the acquisition of customers, how they transact with us, and the engagement of customers, that actually forms the key milestones in a customer journey. The cornerstone behind a customer journey is data. We've heard so much this morning on data, on analytics, building the capability, et cetera, et cetera. So that's fundamental to this. But even before we embark upon a journey to build that capability, I think the direction has to be right. What I see across the industry and the conversations that we've been having here on the sidelines as well, a lot of banks and financial institutions have been trying to do various things in the digital space. But what have actually been the results? I mean, we all have been coming to these conferences for the last 3-4 years. Of course, there are efforts, but then we haven't seen the digital explosion the way it should have happened by now. We're sitting in 2018. So, so the direction has to be right, and the vision has to come right from the top. That's very important. And a very important milestone within that journey has to be developing an analytics capability. You've got to be having the strength of many channels. You can't just do it with a few channels. One of the things that I think is holding us in good stead is the fact that we've got length and breadth of channels. I'm not even talking about the omni-channel concept, which a lot of people refer to, has become quite a buzzword. But even if you have channel availability, the length and breadth of channels, I think you're going to be okay, because today's customer would look at channels, would use channels based on his or her preference at a given point in time, where he is in the customer journey, his moods, his desires, his wants. So even if there is diversity of channel, that works, right? Then the other thing is having a full suite of retail and consumer products. And let me add SME and commercial if you're looking at the entire piece. So that's fundamental. Your channel strategy is fundamental. Then we get on to the fact that once you have all that, what kind of customer journeys are you tracking? Are you doing the right things? The mistakes, I think, which all of us make, we try and look at things from our own perspective, from a banker's perspective. It has to be an outside-in approach. We've got to look at things, we've got to step into the customer's shoes and literally trace the customer's steps in all the interactions that happen with the bank. And guess what? All that we think as bankers, all the inferences that we make or have been making, a lot of those things might not even be true once you start tracking the journey with the right kind of data. And one of the things that you'll probably most likely be surprised with is the journey is in most cases non-linear. You cannot expect your customers to do things in a very linear fashion. They'll be all over the place. They'll be doing a set of things in parallel. So you've got to be prepared for those. You've got to be prepared to then plow those learnings back into your processes, back into your customer engagement strategies, and all the stuff that you're doing on your processes and your products and services. That's fundamental. Challenge, I think the biggest challenge is all of us, we the bankers. Because we have to constantly reinvent ourselves. And particularly so, I think, in this area of retail banking, and I say that very openly, that as retail bankers, we have to change. Our banking is changing. It's no longer just brick and mortar. Brick and mortar, yes, it's a very essential component, but there are so many aspects which have been added to it over the last 5-6 years. And if we don't reinvent ourselves, if we don't have that orientation for data, for analytics, to weave in payments, to weave in the impact of SME or commercial, I think we'll be lost. So the second thing, I think the second biggest challenge is our analytics capabilities. They're all over the place. We have tons of data which is lying there in some, storage, facility, and we're not using it. And how we start to use that data and how soon we can do that, that is another question. And then obviously the skill set, the data scientists, and Nadeem mentioned, he's made a prediction again this morning, by 2025, he said 500,000, 500,000 data scientists in Pakistan. Yes, absolutely. You need that skill set. And we need to nurture that. We need to hire, retain, nurture that skill set in banks and all the other related industries to be able to make an impact. That's fundamental. And thirdly, if I talk from the perspective of retail and consumer banks, then where are those people in our own banks who can understand data, who can decipher that data? Who are the users of data? Who are the people who are going to make demands on those data scientists to provide the right kind of data? So that's, I think, the third biggest challenge. In terms of, you talked about mitigants. So the mitigant really is that the vision has to come right from the top, and it has to start now if it hasn't for some of the banks. The CEO has to drive it. Retail bankers, the CIOs, the CROs, the chief digital officers, they all have to start this campaign or set the vision for people to use data. Increasingly at Bank Alfalah, what we're doing for the last 6-8 months now is really for a lot of decisions which can be driven by data, we are sending people back to the drawing board and we're saying, what is the data telling you? You've got to force people to do that. And that's the only way things will change, cultures will change, and that hunger for data will be there. Moving on to loyalty, I think loyalty, there are so many aspects of loyalty, And obviously, having the right type of journey and being able to navigate the customer through the journey that he makes is fundamental to loyalty. But in this market, in Pakistan especially, rewards have been the foundation of loyalty for many, many years. And we're very proud to have the first enterprise level loyalty program, Orbits, for Bank Alfalah. I think the greatest benefit that, or the leverage that Orbits gives us is our ability to be able to, assign loyalty points, or Orbits as we call them, the currency that we've created, for all their interactions. This is the first time it's happening in this market. For all the transactions which were happening in the branch or through the ADCs, or even the type of acquisition that was happening, everything is now connected, everything is now covered. Secondly, you've got to have a very different regime for burning those points. You've got to make it very desirable, and the redemption also has to be premised on multi-channels. And it's all got to be simple, convenient, easy, quick, and the options have to be very desirable.
Thank you very much, Mehreen. I think you probably elaborated it in the most optimum manner. So, I've got a follow-up question here. Roberto explained to us about the need for us to connect ourselves with everyday lives of the customers. So, I mean, off the cuff, how much do you think we would be able to, as a bank, obviously right now, the traditional banking model that we are following, how much interaction we may be capturing of a particular customer, obviously in this stage of life assessments or life cycle, how many interactions? Can you give us any random percentage of the interactions that we are in with as banks with the customers?
Question.
I'm saying, I mean, we saw the interactions that the customer has in his lifetime. So how many of those interactions is our banks partnering with customers these days without the ecosystem collaboration and ecosystem partnership?
Partnerships are important, and in terms of capturing customer interactions, I mean, the data is there. So we are definitely, we have a sense of what's happening, but it's not coming in a very structured fashion. I think that's what's much needed now at this point in time, and to be able to, decipher it properly in a manner which gives you insights into your future strategies. I think that's something that is absolutely fundamental to moving forward in this journey.
All right, Mehreen, thank you. Nassir, my next question is towards you. I mean, obviously, we all know that you're coming in with a very rich experience of, various global institutions, both local, global as well as regional institutions. So, and my question is, with respect to the role you feel operations plays in a successful and a sustainable digital transformation, and my particular emphasis is actually going to be on how do you think you would propose institutions to enable digitally, to enable or to make sure that they are able to effectively do a digitally enabled process alignment, and what are the challenges you feel are there for the banks to be able to do that appropriately?
Thank you, Faraz. So in terms of my personal thoughts on this, it's really, when you start looking at it, it has to start with the customer. So I know this is a digital conference, but I think my colleague Mehreen over here stated the same thing. It's more about digital being one more channel. It's really up to the customer to choose which channel they wish to take. Within that context, when you start looking at the role of operations, clearly any item that does not allow fulfillment of the customer's requirements is friction. And operations is one of the biggest friction items for most of the banks. Because even where banks to a certain extent have a robust digital channel in front, a lot of the banks still have sneaker brigades in the back office that would be going around processing the transactions. So you might have certain transactions that are flowing through, but then the ultimate customer experience is not frictionless. Secondly, when transactions go wrong, and when you have an investigation on an irate customer, that interaction and remediation needs to be frictionless as well. So given that operations in any institution touches the customer the most compared to front office or any other section, it's a critical component of that change. And that change is certainly not operations alone. I think the biggest detractor is the whole organization. Unless an organization is culturally attuned to digital and how it works, it's really not going to succeed. And unless we encourage the adoption by customers, once we make it frictionless and seamless, customers are not going to adopt it. So you'll have banks in certain cases that have digital offerings, but the consumption of that service is limited compared to their main flows. In that, I think what you have to look at it is really bringing the management teams and the strategic players in the organization together, organizing events. There's a lot of incubators and hives, and I think they have a very important role to partner with banks, come in and have the companies that are working in these incubators do a half-day session, do like a speed dating session, 5-10 minutes, and then they have stalls where the management team and the senior team can go sit down in their areas of interest and understand what this product is about. And that helps them understand the power. So for example, in my last role, I was with an Islamic bank. And as we all know, the paperwork in Islamic banking can be quite onerous because we have to document various sequences of a transaction. And so we had a team that was giving a digital Sharia solution. And that, we saw our entire Sharia board clustered around it and excited around it, which really served us well, because now when we go to them and we ask them that we need you to approve this, except there's going to be no paper, but we'll explain to you how the system is going to do the steps and how the customer is going to validate it, there's going to be less resistance internally to the adoption. Similarly, controls, compliance, all these units weigh in the final structure of how your digital channel is going to look like to the customer. When I look at how some of the digital apps and other components are there in abroad, it's very seamless. And when you look and utilize some of the digital apps here in Pakistan, there's a lot of extra steps that seem to be frivolous, and if you dig into them, it would typically be, this was a control thing or an audit thing or a compliance thing, and we somehow have to bring everybody together to smart controls which are not intrusive. So that's, to me, the thing. The other element for banks is digital is not cheap. It's extremely, extremely expensive, and the cycle that you have to continuously refresh, there's a significant investment involved. And I think for most banks, the opportunity is not to try and do things alone, but to collaborate, create sandboxes, open up their APIs, let the incubator companies come in, let them experiment, co-create something of value which would meet a customer's use case. So when we talk about the customer journeys, I think the first thing is that you have to look at, what is the profiles that you have for your customers? What is that straw profile? What do they want? What do they desire? Whether it is your existing customers or your targeted customers. And then you create the digital solutions. And from an operations perspective, ideally, the more that we can virtualize operations and eliminate it, to using digital, the more seamless that customer journey and the more frictionless it becomes.
Thank you very much, Nassir. Tahir, we already have talked a lot about customer centricity, and I think probably since morning we've been talking about it, and we've been using that as a mantra. To be honest, I mean, every digital conference that we usually start off with and end up is we usually continuously talking about customer centricity. But I know obviously it's much more difficult than only saying it. So I mean, my specific question to you, and I think probably we might have talked about it a while ago also, is to get into some technicality of how actually you do your customer journey mapping. How do you actually identify what kind of interactions a customer does with you, Tahir, and how many touch points do you provide to him to be able to interact with you at all points in time? So if you can elaborate on that painstaking job that you may be having in your mind in terms of getting done at your institution, if any.
So thank you, Faraz. Thank you, Faraz. Like you mentioned that there's been a lot talked about the customer experience and the customer journey on an overall basis. But like you said, it's much easier said than done. So I think one of the, where does this customer journey friction come from? Really it starts from the way our products and systems or services are designed. It's a very siloed legacy process. So you design a product, you design a service, it goes from, the product area, then it goes on to perhaps the compliance area, perhaps goes to operations, risk, and so on and so forth. And, in all of these areas, everybody's trying to do the best job that they can in the specific silo that they have. At the end of the day, you have a very compromised customer experience because the product of the way this sort of product sort of ends up. So this is something which is due to the way the organizations are internally structured in terms of their, in terms of how they operate. So one of the first things has to be, fixing the culture or fixing the setup in terms of how these processes are designed. People really have to sit together, people really have to talk about, people really have to be aligned on the same objective. We talk a lot about compliance issues and, the difficulties in going through but the reality is the regulator doesn't ask you to sort of, do things a certain way. They essentially tell you, these are the sort of controls we would like, these are the sort of, responsibilities you have. And it's up to us to be a bit more imaginative about how we sort of come up with those solutions. So that's one element. Then in terms of how overall they should be structured, first is identifying the right customer journeys which we want to improve, which are the biggest pain points. So some of it, yes, will come from data, but a lot of it is, the feedback you receive from your customers. So data alone, perhaps in isolation, gives you trends, gives you ideas, but really it has to be backed up by, the real human interaction, feedback, other things. So that gives you a sense of what you want to work on first. Then you probably have to map where you are in that experience against, where you should be, what the other marketplaces are doing, or what the best practices are. Ideally, you want to, assess yourself against the best practices. And then really everybody needs to come together in a room with the same objective, and perhaps the doors need to be shut. Perhaps there has to be an external consultant assisting. But at least for the first few times, how people need to actually collaborate and do their, do their own jobs, but with the overall objective of ensuring that the customer journey is, improved and the customer experience is improved. And then I think one of the things, perhaps it's a cultural thing, I don't know, but really when we do these things or when organizations do these things, the customer journey is redesigned or the customer experience redesigned and it's mission accomplished. Whereas this is a continuous process. Everything, every redesign will, create new pain points perhaps, or highlight new problems, or perhaps, 2-3 years later, there'll be something new happening. So this is a continuous process. It cannot happen that, you do it once and then, okay, we redesigned the account opening process and this is it. And really that's a mindset which needs to change. And the final thing is that this can only be done from within the organization. It's a very painstaking process, but the problem emanates from inside, and the solution will also only emanate from the inside. So I think broadly, that's how I would sort of look at things. And you know, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, certainly it does, Tahir, but I think it seems like you are asking all of us to do a lot of work in relation to each of these customer journeys that you are talking about. And this really causes a lot of concern as to what kind of time frame you're talking about, how do we prioritize this, and what kind of external interactions we capture, what kind of internal interactions we capture, what do we have currently, what do we don't have, where do we take the data from, structured, unstructured, many things. But you're right, you're absolutely right when you say that this is a painstaking job. It is, indeed it is, and that's why we probably might not have been able to do that in time for the last 2-3 years, because we probably might have been doing a lot of business as usual work. So yes. So now I come on to the most agile of the organizations which are sitting over here, FINCA. So you're managing FINCA's branchless banking business, Tughral, and I think must have been an interesting experience for you, I'm sure. But when we talk about commercial banks, and I will be very candid with you in this, is that we've got views around commercial, viability, and also around, sustainability, most importantly. And we talk to a lot of people, and they say this. In commercial banking industry, I'm saying. But I would like to obviously ask you about your experience with respect to the model success, because you're doing it. So I'm sure you are treating it as a successful model. And also, any challenges and any propositions that you would like to share with all of us in terms of introducing the innovation, as you might have done, probably. So any lessons learned for us?
Thank you very much for that question. I'm really glad you asked it. I'm not surprised that question comes up, because if you look at SimSim, which FINCA Microfinance Bank launched in collaboration with FINCA in July, where we said, we are going to make transactions free. We are going to give wallets onboarding within a minute for free. When we said we are going to charge 0 MDR for all those transactions which are done over at our merchants over QR codes. When we said that payroll, a solution that we've developed and deployed, is given away for free, and then the salary disbursement is run for free, people turn around and they, they're a bit thrown off by all this free, and they say, where do you make the money? And it's a valid question. But to answer that, I'm just going to quote Chris Skinner from a conference that I heard him speak at, and he said, in the mid-1800s, if you'd asked people what the future looks like, they would have said faster horses. And then in 1885, along came the automobile. And now horses are used for equestrian sports, mainly. At the heart of this question really is the vision that you have for the future. And FINCA has a vision for a digitized economy. We believe that the world is moving towards a cashless economy. It may not happen in the next 2 years, in 3 years. It may not happen 100%. But we do believe that this is going to happen. And so where do we want to position ourselves? Do we want to position ourselves as one of the followers who are going to do a Me Too 2-3 years down the road? Or do we want to take the risk right now of taking a leadership position? So what we are doing is we are standing by our vision, and we're taking a leadership position, where we're saying that when you move to a digitized economy, the mindset of transaction-based pricing is outdated. And we want to move more towards value-based pricing. And let me explain the difference. The difference is, I'm sure, I don't know if you guys were, but I certainly, when I was a student and I didn't have a lot of money, and I had to take a taxi, and there was a meter in the taxi. Every kilometer that the taxi went and the meter went another 10 rupees or 15 rupees, I used to feel a bit of pain in here, and I usually used to tell the taxi guy, just stop, let me walk the next 2 kilometers on my own. That's called the taxi meter effect when it comes to pricing. And that's the friction that transaction-based pricing is bringing into the digitized world right now. Forget commercial banks. Digital banking, which started in Pakistan about almost 10 years ago, is still stuck in that mindset. We started off with transaction-based pricing. That is exactly where we are today. And I would ask the question, what has that done for financial inclusion? What has that done to drive the uptake of mobile wallets? We're a little bank that's launched an e-wallet in July last year. Today we stand at 170,000 wallets, and we're growing exponentially. We want to position ourselves in revenue streams where we've actually created real value for our customer. Where does that come from? We believe that comes from access to credit, which allows people to better their lives financially. We believe it comes from doing risk mitigation for them, where you're preventing, you're protecting them against shocks, and where you're putting in a marketplace where you're allowing digital trade to take place. Now, when you do this, the entire equation changes. Now, ask me what my fixed costs are, and they're very different from what commercial banks' fixed costs are. Does that give me flexibility to play around with my pricing? Yes, it does. And it's an advantage that I have as a disruptor. Additionally, and this is the last point that I want to make, is that you guys, when this question really comes out of people looking at our model through the prism of an existing ecosystem. And that ecosystem is changing very fast. I think I would turn this back to the commercial banks and say, you've got about 2 to 3 years to look at your own business models and figure out the next curve. I was heading microfinance for 11 African countries before I came back to Pakistan. And we were collecting premiums and dispersing claims entirely over the mobile money channel in Africa, in some of the most countries that needed development like Malawi, Burkina Faso. I was paying my maid using mobile money. I even paid the mochi who fixed my shoe $2 using mobile money. So it is happening, and that wave is now coming into Pakistan as well. And it's all about the question really is, where do you want to place yourself? Do you take a leadership position, or do you wait? And we are taking the risk of innovation. The challenge, of course, is also that when you take an innovation position, when you take a leadership position, you incur risk, you take risk. And then you've got to have the appetite for it. We've talked a lot about where the banking industry is going and how it's changing. Well, look at telecom. In a space of 2 to 3 years, their entire revenue model has been flipped upside down. And guess what? It was WhatsApp, which is free, and Skype, which is free, that did it. So our challenge really is being on the forefront of that innovation curve, taking the risks. We're happy to take them. We're willing to take short-term losses. We're willing to have delayed revenue, but that's because we believe in the vision that we've set out with.
Well, my sincere apologies to my panelists, is because I think probably each of them have got a lot of success stories to share, but I'm actually confining them to talk as little as possible. Well, in fact, that makes their lives so difficult in terms of sharing how much that they can share with you. My apology, Tughral. And now I'm actually going to ask this question from Mehreen, because I think she can diplomatically handle that very well. I probably was it was very difficult for me to handle that observation which we made to one of the board members, rather the board chairman of a bank who we met. And when we said that digital will have implications on the branch network that you have, and you may necessarily have to consider about your branch, opening or branch placement strategy in the next 5 years or so, and it may result in, in different branch models you would pursue. We had to more or less wrap up the session and leave the premises, to be honest. Because there was no willingness to hear about this. And there was a number which was quoted into getting into thousands of branches, thousand more branches into the network. So my question to you, therefore, would be is that your institution being a forward-looking institution, how do you see that? Because we talked about the value accretion side, the revenue accretion side, but we have to talk about cost optimization, resource optimization part. So how do you see this as, is it an opportunity to fundamentally rethink the branch models and sizing And how do you propose us to go about it? Under a transition approach, perhaps maybe a structured approach, whatever.
Yeah, that's certainly something that we've started to think about. In Pakistan last year, I'll give you Pakistan's example first, because all the researches that we've talked about or heard since this morning were mainly from more developed countries. Now in Pakistan, 300 branches were still added last year in 2017, net addition. That number may have been smaller than the previous years, but then maybe there were factors other than digital. Obviously, digital has not come into play yet. The interest rate environment, the viability of branches, and so on and so forth. But yes, that thought is definitely there in the thinking. And especially a bank like us, which is going to pursue a fairly aggressive digital ambition, then where does it leave the branch network? So it's not just about the network, it's about the design of the branches. It's also about the mix of branches that you're going to have, because if you're talking digital, then there will be experience centers, there will be smarter, fitter branches, leaner branches, but that will really be governed by what the purpose is of a branch. Why is that branch there, essentially? What is the market that we are operating in, and what is the market that we want to capture? And thirdly, what is the business case for it? But within that, I'm sure over the years, there will be a thought process to continuously review your branch expansion strategy, make it smarter, use data analytics. We've already started to do that in terms of bringing in so many other variables to take a decision when you're opening a branch. So definitely that thought will be there. But the new branches that you will be putting up will be smarter, will be leaner. And essentially what I'm looking at is really a differentiation between a branch which is very transactionally oriented versus a branch which is in an urban center, which is more for other purposes. It could be even the manifestation of how you want to project the brand. It could be a center which provides advice, problem resolution. All the experts are there. So there would be different sort of purposes for branches in different locations. And also it'll depend on the audience that you're trying to cater to. For example, even in the developed world, for the commercial clients, for the mid and the smalls, digital has not even started to make an impact. So what do you do with those customers? You can't just abandon them.
Absolutely.
So all those factors will come into play. But yes, definitely to answer your question, that thought is there and is being fed into our strategy for branch expansion in the future.
Excellent. Excellent. So we need to obviously have that thought built into our DNA, to be honest. And one of my spotlight questions is now going to be to Nassir, because it would be around not exactly what, but exactly how to do it. Because we talk about all these jargons of chatbots, robo-advices, IPA versus RPA, big data, analytics, obviously, and we all know that obviously it seems like a war on data is as imminent as war on water, probably. But the question has always been is to take a step back and see where we are and what sort of steps we need to take to be able to do that. Because the problem is that we have been talking about it for the last 3 years, maybe. But the problem always stays is that how much of data that we have is mineable, and how to make that other data set that we have mineable, and how much of data is structured and unstructured. So if you could please elaborate your thoughts on this, it's going to be extremely useful for all of us.
Sure. So from my perspective, I think data in most banks that I've seen is fairly unstructured, and it's in pockets. So wherever there's a need, there's a very specific domain expertise and data. And then we have for digital, it's more about the customer behavior, the customer's preferences. It's not just about making a credit decision or potentially the next best offer. It's about understanding the customer's entire relationship with a bank, as well as looking at the relationship outside the bank. So for example, if the customer has a credit card, what kind of spending is there, what is that profile, and being able to take that data in one collective bucket where you can use big data to analyze it and then to make some meaningful use cases and then individualize them to a specific customer. So I think there's two levels of it. One is, looking at it at a broad segment and being able to push something to a broad segment, which is what we traditionally do. But the second really is to then be able to individualize that big data to a very specific individual, not just a particular used case. And for that, I think there's a lot of work for banks to do. It's not a quick fix, and we need to start putting all structured and unstructured data into a data lake, start to use some of the modern tools that are now available to be basically able to mine it. And at the same time, I think we need to start piloting and experimenting with some of the basic chatbots, some of the basic intelligent tools, so that at least we can bring some level of, we can reduce some level of that friction that exists in our interaction with the customers. Because technology cycles are now becoming shorter and shorter, faster and faster. So if we wait for that final solution, I think by the time we reach it, that final solution would have totally altered in state and we'd still be chasing it. So my advice would be, look at where you have those buckets, see if you're efficiently exercising them, and at the same time, collect that data together, even if you don't have the tools today, to understand what to figure out with it.
Yeah, so essentially your recommendation is to go bite-sized and not wait for your overall 5-year data augmentation and cleansing program to end.
Absolutely. Something else would be out there on the horizon that might leapfrog.
I agree. Obviously, you probably need an army of resources to be able to do that for all the data fields and attributes that you have. So thank you very much, Nassir. So Tahir, over to you again. And I think this essentially is going to be a very interesting question in terms of you to be able to elaborate upon any augmentation that you would feel is going to be necessary in a typical service-oriented mobile application that we usually have. And in fact, we have been doing mobile applications for quite some time now, but we've got vanilla service-oriented solutions for customers. So how do you try and make that product-oriented in terms of customer service experience and also augmentation of the interactions that we want to have with customers?
This is actually something very, very important and obviously very interesting. I think Mr. Tubano was giving the presentation before us. And really, I mean, he held up the phone that this is my bank, the bank should be invisible. And we went on and I mean, saw the aspirational video of how the sort of customer interacted with the bank. So, really that is what an app should be at the end of the day. That is the desired end goal. But really, we're very, very far from that right now. Essentially, pretty much all mobile apps, barring perhaps a few of the banking industry in Pakistan, you can check your balance, you can do a few transfers, you can do a few internal sort of, service-oriented actions. And like I said, barring a few, I mean, some of them obviously are well designed and have much more functionality. But really, we need to sort of keep augmenting this and keep growing on, the feature set of the app so that the interaction of the customers sort of moves and migrates from the branches towards these apps. Some of the things which are very obvious and come to mind, financial planning, for example. That is something which can and should be moved to a banking app because it's a clear fit. And it helps you sell your other products in terms of, a saving account, bank assurance, and essentially personal finance management. So these are the basics we should start off with pretty much immediately if we can. And then the app is a very, very powerful tool in the sense that we keep talking about the telcos have X data which banks don't have. But if your app is on that phone, you do have access to at least some of that data if it's designed well, if it's built well. So an app is a way to augment your analytics abilities to a large extent. And right now, in terms of selling, if you see, what happens is that, for example, we see that banks are looking for customer 360, that the customer comes in at the right moment, so you can just sell him the right product immediately there and then. But that app is that tool. The app is your biggest branch. How many people log on to an app? So the ability to push a customized solution through your app, be it a credit card, be it any other product, at the right time, at the right opportunity, is where we really need to take our apps, and we need to augment them in that manner and build them in that manner that they have the ability to do these things. Really need to start thinking, on this overall sort of in this line. So essentially, that's my sort of 2 cents on that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tahir. So, as a matter of fact, make it classy and glossy, right? I mean, that's the only solution. And that may enable some people who are not really using your app, but just download their app, and we feel happy because they have downloaded our app, right?
Yes.
I think the ratio of usage versus downloading may probably be 10% or 20% in different institutions, and that may probably one of the reasons why people do not really, remain comfortable in using the app to its optimum efficiency or effectiveness. So my last question to you would be, Tughral, and I'll try and make it again agile-oriented, is because you do not have legacy systems, you do not have legacy complications, and that's a good thing about this. So how much of that has helped you in terms of accelerating your pace, and how do you think that, how do you feel that kind of innovation that you might have pursued, you would propose to people who are sitting over here, in terms of ensuring that they also are able to accelerate their pace and make sure that they are having some sustainable and successful digital transformations done?
Thank you. So I'll start with the last question first, which is what would we want to share with the audience over here? What we want to share is that we believe in collaboration. I think that's already been said on this panel. And I think the pie is big enough right now for us to collaborate and crack these problems together. And we would like to work with other organizations in helping that happen. As far as the advantage that we've got in terms of the transformation, yes, it's been a big advantage not having a legacy or a big baggage for me to take on and try and transform. Because transformation, I think, is not as much about technology as it is about mindset. And the mindset really internally within an organization. I think people underestimate how powerful the culture of an organization is in impacting its bottom line. How the incentives of the incumbent managers, of the incumbent leaders within an organization shape their behavior in either adopting a new technology or rejecting it. People tend to be risk averse. And in banking especially, I think they're more risk averse than other industries. People's bonuses are tied to financial success. That means that risk taking and the appetite for taking on failure is low. So when I set about to building my team with the support of my CEO, we created a whole new mix of people in our branchless banking team with a lot of background coming in from telecom, with people from different industries being pulled in. That's one thing that I would suggest. I was speaking to somebody from Goldman Sachs a couple of days ago, somebody in the leadership position, and he shared with me something very interesting. Globally, Goldman Sachs has 30,000 employees. And what he shared with me was that out of those 30,000, 10,000 now are software engineers or people with technical backgrounds. Their CFO is a software engineer, former software engineer. Now, that's an example of an organization that's transforming itself from within. It's rewriting its DNA. It's rewriting its organizational culture. And that's what I want to share with our colleagues around in the hall as well, that when it comes to transformation, technology is probably the easiest bit. Where you've got to start is the mindset. And it's not so much as about skills, technical skills, as it is about the risk-taking appetite, about the entrepreneurial spirit. So you've got to start staffing your leadership positions with the sort of people who want to change the way banking is being done.
Thanks a lot, each and every one of you. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Hamza. Are we open for any questions, Hamza, for like one or two, or you think that we are running short of time? Sorry. Sorry, we can? Short of time? Sure. So my apology to the audience. We are short of time, so we will wrap it up. And if there are any questions, then obviously you can ask each one of us during the tea break. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And to the participants, it's our apology. We are not proceeding for the question answer session, but don't worry, we would hopefully have them here around with us during the tea break time, and that's the time when we can definitely catch up with our questions. I would now invite Mr. Mohsin Nathani, CEO designated, Habib Metro, to please come on the stage to present the memento to our panelist and the moderator. And I would request Hamza Wasi Hashmi to please join him on the stage. Okay, so I'll go in the order. Mehreen Ahmed, Group Head, Retail Banking. Banker. Nassir Salim, GM Global Operations, Habib Bank. Tahir Rizavi, Head Innovation and Analytics at Faysal Bank. Tughral, Ali, Business Head. And finally, our moderator, Syed Faraz Anwer. A big round of applause for our moderator and the panelists. Sir, are we gathering here for group photo?